If you're holding USDC or USDT on Coinbase Canada right now, the federal government just quietly passed a law that directly affects those coins, and most Canadians have no idea it happened. I'm your crypto compass. Let's get your bearings. In March 2026, Canada became one of the first countries in the world to pass a federal stablecoin law. It's buried inside a budget bill. It's getting almost no mainstream coverage, and it's going to change how stablecoins work in Canada by 2027. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what the law says, what it means for USDC and USDT right now, and critically, there's one thing every stablecoin holder in Canada needs to act on before 2027. I'll get to that at the end. Stick around. Before we get into the law, let me quickly explain what a stablecoin actually is. Because the word sounds technical, but the concept is simple. A stablecoin is a cryptocurrency designed to stay at exactly $1, not $1 Canadian dollar. Most major stablecoins are pegged to the US dollar, USDC and USDT. The two you'll see on almost every exchange are always supposed to be worth $1. They don't swing up and down like Bitcoin. They just sit there worth $1. So why do Canadians use them? A few reasons. Some people park their money in USDC when they think Bitcoin is about to drop. It's a way to stay in the crypto ecosystem without riding the volatility. Others use stablecoins to move money between exchanges quickly, or to buy crypto at a target price without waiting for a bank wire. Now, here's the key point. Even though USDC looks like just a digital dollar, it's backed by actual assets, short-term US government bonds, and cash held by a custodian. If the issuer goes bankrupt, you want to know there's real money sitting behind your coins. And that's exactly what Canada's new law is designed to guarantee. Now that you understand what stablecoins are, let me tell you exactly what the Canadian government just did about them. Bill C-15 is Canada's Budget Implementation Act for 2026. It received royal assent, meaning it officially became law on March 26, 2026. Inside, it is a new piece of legislation called the Stablecoin Act. Here's what it requires. Any company that issues a stablecoin in Canada, so any company that creates and distributes a digital coin pegged at $1, must now register with the Bank of Canada, not the OSC, not FINTRAC. The Bank of Canada, that's the highest level financial supervisor this country has. They have to hold $1 in reserve for every dollar of stablecoin in circulation. And those reserves can't be just anything. They must be highly liquid assets held by a qualified custodian. Think cash and short-term government bonds, the same assets that back traditional bank deposits. The law also requires that issuers allow you to redeem your stablecoin for actual dollars at par, meaning one stablecoin gets you exactly $1 on demand. No gates, no delays, no waiting 90 days. Redemption on demand. And here's a significant one. Stablecoin issuers are prohibited from paying you interest or yield on your stablecoins. If you see any platform offering 8% annual yield on your USDC, that product will not be legal in Canada once this framework comes into force. Regulators deliberately excluded yield to prevent stablecoins from becoming unregulated savings accounts. The framework applies to non-bank issuers. So, companies like Circle, which issues USDC, will need to comply. Traditional banks issuing their own digital dollars are covered under different rules already. The full framework comes into force on a 12 to 18-month implementation timeline from royal assent, meaning enforcement begins in late 2027. Coming up, I'll explain what this actually means if you're holding USDC or USDT on Coinbase Canada right now. And I'll flag the one thing you may need to change before 2027. Let me be clear about something up front. If you're holding USDC or USDT on Coinbase Canada today, you do not need to do anything right now. The law doesn't come into full force until 2027. Your coins are not at risk. What this law does is raise the floor on what Canadian stablecoin holders can expect going forward. Think of it like deposit insurance for your crypto, except instead of the government backstopping your bank account, the government is now requiring that the stablecoin in your wallet is backed by real assets, audited and redeemable on demand. By 2027, any stablecoin that isn't compliant with the Bank of Canada framework will not be available on registered Canadian exchanges. Coinbase Canada, Newton, and ShakePay will only list stablecoins that pass the new standard. If a stablecoin can't demonstrate proper reserves and on-demand redemption, it gets delisted from Canadian platforms. USDC is well positioned. Circle, the company that issues USDC, already maintains fully audited reserves and has been operating toward regulatory compliance in multiple jurisdictions. USDT, issued by Tether, has historically faced more scrutiny around reserve transparency. How Tether responds to the Canadian framework over the next 18 months will be worth watching. Now, here's the action item I mentioned in the intro. If you are currently using any platform, Canadian or offshore, that is offering you yield or interest on your USDC or USDT, that product may not survive the new framework. Yield-bearing stablecoin products are explicitly prohibited under Bill C-15. If you have money parked in one of those products, now is the time to understand the terms and plan a transition. Don't wait until the 2027 deadline forces the platform's hand. If you're finding this useful, a quick subscribe means you'll catch the next breakdown. I cover Canadian crypto every week. Here's something that might surprise you. The United States does not have a federal stablecoin law yet. The Genius Act, the U.S. stablecoin bill, is still working through Congress in 2026. It hasn't passed. The U.S. has been debating stablecoin regulation for 3 years. Canada already did it. That is genuinely unusual. Canada is not typically ahead of the U.S. on financial regulation, but on stablecoins, Canada has moved faster with a clearer framework tied to its most credible financial institution. That is a meaningful advantage for Canadian retail investors. The European Union has its own framework called MiCA, which has similar reserve and redemption requirements and came into force earlier. Canada is now in the same tier as the EU for stablecoin consumer protections. The US is still catching up. For Canadian beginners, this matters because it tells you something real about where to hold your assets. Platforms operating under Canadian regulation, OSC registered compliant, now subject to the Stablecoin Act, are inside one of the strongest consumer protection frameworks in the world for digital assets. That is not an accident. That is the result of a decade of deliberate regulatory work. If this kind of Canadian-specific breakdown is useful, subscribing takes 2 seconds and means you won't miss the next one. I do this every week, and it's completely free. Let me bring this back to what it means for you practically. If you're holding USDC or USDT on Coinbase Canada, keep it there. You're already on a registered exchange. When the 2027 rules kick in, only compliant stablecoins will remain listed. You're fine. If you're on an offshore or unregistered platform, especially one offering you guaranteed yield on stablecoins, start moving toward registered Canadian exchanges now. The CRA has been automatically receiving transaction data from all registered Canadian platforms since January 2026 under CARF. The Stablecoin Act tightens that net further in 2027. And if you're brand new to stablecoins, the short version is this. Canada has now passed a law that means every stablecoin on a regulated Canadian exchange by 2027 will be backed by real assets, redeemable on demand, and supervised by the Bank of Canada. That is one of the strongest stablecoin guarantees available anywhere in the world. Canada got ahead of this one. Canada's Stablecoin Act is one of the most important pieces of crypto legislation this country has ever passed, and almost no one is talking about it. Now you know. Subscribe and hit the bell. I cover Canadian crypto every week. The next video is about something that's going to change how you think about who's actually buying Bitcoin right now. And drop your biggest stablecoin question in the comments. I read every single one.